All right, the Akron Rotary is officially called to order. Welcome, everyone. Our invocation is by Connor Jarvis. Connor?
Thanks, Dr. Rob. Just kind of, I don't want to say in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, but with it coming to a close, I have a Seussism from a book that has just all these this quotable advice from Dr. Seuss that I thought was particularly fitting, and then I want to tie it together into a brief just story experience I had yesterday in prayer. So it's, don't be afraid to accept help. I floated 12 days without toothpaste or soap. I practically almost had given up hope when someone up high shouted, "Here, catch the rope." Then I knew that my troubles had come to an end, and I climbed up the rope calling, "Thank you, my friend." And so that's from Dr. Seuss's I Had Trouble in Getting to Sala Salu, and was not familiar with that one, but I found that that Seussism to be very quotable and appropriate for Mental Health Awareness Month. And so just a brief story. Yesterday afternoon, I was having a drink with a client who happens to be a Rotarian himself, and we were catching up, and just about 10 minutes into the conversation at the place we were at, we were interrupted by a very troubled man named Josh who was battling depression. And Josh had lost his job due to COVID, really shared much of his life story with us over the hour and 15 minutes or so we spent talking to the gentleman after he came up to us. And he's had a rough life. He was a former addict, was wondering if one of us happened to be an attorney, as he was frustrated with the luck that he had not been having and helping to get custody of his children. His ex-wife took full custody of their 3 kids. She's shacking up with his former best friend. It was just a very, sad story. It would have been easy to kind of blow him off and treat him as he was, interrupting our time together and not give him the time of day. But this grown gentleman's tearing up as, he's talking to us and sharing the story. And again, it would have been easy to blow off. It would have been easy to judge him. He said a few things that at first kind of made me think he obviously he was at the bar, but, might have been not in the best state mentally beyond his depression as far as what he was going to do with his life. And thankfully, that turned out not to be the case. But again, we just kind of sat there and listened for about an hour or so, made sure he was okay. We bought him some food, which felt was much needed, and just showed him kindness, compassion, and care. And we wanted him to know that God is still there. He said he'd been praying for 2.5 years for a change of fortune, and it hadn't happened. And again, it just really made me think. And as I reflected on that experience yesterday, and my friend and I both said to each other, there was obviously a reason we were meant to be here today and meant to be an ear for that gentleman to bend and, pray with him, keep him in our prayers, and just be that light that he needed in any way possible. It's just by listening to him, by buying him some food, and just showing that someone out there cares and is willing to hear his story. So I would challenge all of us to see, really, who can we be that for? We all can be that friend that throws the rope, if you will, from that Seussism I shared to kick this off. And I just pray that our hearts and our eyes are open to those opportunities, not just throughout the remainder of this month, but every day, and where we can be that for someone. So I don't share that to toot my own horn and say, look at us and the good thing we did, but it was a story that I thought was particularly fitting and something that would have been easy for me in a busy day to disregard as opposed to just being there. So if you will bow your heads with me, I do have a brief prayer for victory over depression from a book that I have called Prayers That Avail Much. I'll apologize ahead of time, but it does use Jesus's name in there. And I know we're trying to be neutral in our prayers, but I'm not going to edit that out. But this is fitting for anyone that is out there, and a prayer for anyone that's struggling with depression or other mental health disorders. So starts, Father God, you're my refuge and my high tower and my stronghold in times of trouble. I lean on you and confidently put my trust in you, for you have not forsaken me. I know I can count on you for help no matter what. I put my hope in you. I praise you, my Savior and my God. Lord, you lift up those who are bowed down. Therefore, I am strong and my heart takes courage. I establish myself on righteousness, right standing in conformity with your will and order. I am far even from the thought of oppression or destruction, for I fear not. I am far from terror, for it shall not come near me. Father, you have thoughts and plans for my welfare and my peace. My mind is stayed on you, for I stop allowing myself to be agitated and disturbed and intimidated and cowardly and unsettled. In the name of Jesus, I free my mind from wrong thought patterns. I tear down strongholds that have protected bad perceptions about myself. I submit to you, Father, and resist fear, discouragement, self-pity, and depression. I will not give place to the devil by harboring resentment and holding on to anger. I surround myself with songs and shouts of deliverance from depression, and I will continue to be an overcomer by the word of my testimony and the blood of the Lamb. Father, I thank you that I have been given a spirit of power and of love and of calm and a well-balanced mind. I have discipline and self-control. I have the mind of Christ and hold the thoughts, feelings, and purposes of his heart in me. I have a fresh mental and spiritual attitude, for I am constantly renewed in the spirit of my mind with your word, Father. Therefore, I brace up and reinvigorate and cut through and make firm and straight paths for my feet, safe and upright and happy paths that go in the right direction. I arise from the depression and prostration in which circumstances have kept me. I rise to new life. I shine and am radiant with the glory of the Lord. Thank you, Father, in Jesus' name, that I am set free from every evil work. I praise you that the joy of the Lord is my strength and my stronghold. Hallelujah. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. And now if you can join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Cheryl, can you share the four-way test slide? The four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you, Connor. Chaz Billington has joined us as our guest greeter. I know of one guest, so Chaz, take it away.
Absolutely. Let's give a warm Rotary welcome to Bob McClellan, a 38-year Rotarian who's recently moved here from Kansas City. Bob, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Certainly I would. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to join you via Zoom. And as you just mentioned, I have been a member of Rotary for 38 years, moved to Akron from Kansas City because my daughter and son-in-law are up here with our two grandkids. And they came up here in 2012. So we have been visiting here since then and are very impressed with Akron and like it. And when our first grandson came along about 5 years ago, we started thinking about moving up here. And then when our granddaughter came along 2 years ago, we knew we had to move up here. So we were looking, and the housing situation is as bad as they say. I mean, you look at a house and you come up to look at it, or you hear about a house for sale and you come up to look at it and it would be sold. And we actually bought this house via FaceTime call. That my daughter went through the house and we were back in Kansas City and we made an offer, but that's how we got it. And so we're glad to be here, and we'll enjoy looking forward to meeting everyone at Rotary in person and just getting to see people in person again.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Anybody else, Chaz, other than Justice Dewine? We'll introduce him in a little bit.
Nope, that's all I have. If there's anybody else out there, feel free to introduce yourself, but that's the roster.
Very good. Thanks, Chaz. Are there any Rotary ambassadors here? Any of the members been to another Rotary club or at another Rotary event that they would like to share? I'm going to flip my screen so I can see. Cheryl's hand's usually up.
Not today. I know. It seems strange not to be raising my hand.
You must have taken the week off, Cheryl. I don't know.
I did.
Anybody?
Dr. Rob, I forgot. I have. So I'm on the district strategic planning committee, and we had a meeting last week, and that's going to be finalized very soon and pushed out to clubs. All very much in alignment with what our club has identified as priorities as well.
Oh, good. Well, thanks. Keep us posted. Anybody else?
This is kind of an indirect thing. Yesterday evening, we got an email from one of the Recreational Vehicle Fellowship past presidents, and she was soliciting information for the RI magazine for the RV Fellowship. We're going to do a story in September or October on the RV Fellowship, and we were able to send them some information on what the fellowship has meant to us in the last 20 years and how the fellowships benefit all Rotarians that get involved. They even have fellowship for attorneys.
I guess attorneys need fellowship too, Jack. Right, Chaz? Jacinto?
Absolutely right.
People who need people.
That's right. Okay, announcements. Rotary International has gone virtual for our convention this year, 2021, and our newsletter will give you opportunities to register online as soon as you get to that. I don't know if I saw Gina K. Maddox. Gina, are you on today?
She's not.
Okay. Steve or Jacinto, do you want to share with the club one of the plans we have, or Jack, since you're actually going to be purchasing the equipment with our
Sure,
diversity group?
I'd be happy to share. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee has been very busy in building relationships throughout the city. And one of those relationships has to do with Middlebury and the well, and Zach Cole leading the well over there. And we're looking to have an outdoor event coming up either June the 5th or June the 12th. I don't know if we have actually settled on the day, where we're going to be doing some landscaping for 5 homes that Zach and his team had identified as needing some help. And what's nice about it, it's going to allow us to be together. It's going to allow us to be outside. It's going to allow us to begin to make a difference in that little community over there. So we're looking to do it on a Saturday, like as mentioned, either the 5th or the 12th, and it will probably be 2 to 3 hours tops.
So do we bring our own equipment or just our Rotary t-shirts?
I think we will probably want to bring some shovels and some spades and some hand gloves for the hands and so on and so forth, and be ready to rock and roll. But there will be further communication coming out. And I know that Gina K is looking to see how many people have committed so far. And we may be sounding a call for more help.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
So it'll be good to get some normal-ish activities. And I'm happy to, I want to publicly thank our risk committee that's been helping us look at opportunities to do what we can do as safely as we can do it. And next week, our own Chaz Billington will be presenting to the club so that you have some understanding as to what that group of Rotarians has been up to behind the curtain. So we'll make it clearly transparent and just talk about what we're doing moving forward and how we've been working through the pandemic with requests that have come in. So thank you there as well. Is anybody happy today? Looking for happy dollars. Let's see.
I'll start, Dr. Rob, while you're looking. I'm really happy. I finally, thanks to being vaccinated, got to go to St. Louis this past weekend, and I was able to visit with my uncle, who I haven't seen in over a year, who is in assisted living, and of course my cousins who are about a mile from him. So I was very, very happy, as was my husband. We had a great weekend visiting, and I'm usually down there every other month, but COVID stopped all of that.
Well, we're glad you got to see your uncle, and we're sorry that your route home was disrupted and took you several hours more than you planned, and a thunderstorm as well. So glad you're back safely.
Thank you.
Anybody else happy? quiet crowd today.
Big boy
You
is.
wear yourself out this weekend in the sun. All right, David Hall.
Yeah, I got $5 happy. Just had a great weekend. We got our mulch in, and we got our flowers planted, we got our garden planted, and the house is looking good. So I'm ready to enjoy the summer. So just happy about that.
Excellent.
Rob, I have $5. I wouldn't call them happy dollars, but I would call them honorary dollars. And Doug Cole lost his mother on Saturday. And it's been an interesting year because his dad preceded his mom not too many months ago. And so this is to honor Catherine Cole and for her legacy to the Cole family. And so $5, and God bless you, Doug, and everybody.
Well, that's nice, Steve. Thank you. Our condolences, Doug. Anybody else? All right, if you suddenly, oh, there we go, Dr. Doug.
I hope you can hear me. The audio on this thing's a little flaky. I'll throw in $5 happy. Just got an email from the president of the university, not just to me personally, saying that the University of Akron is going to be substantially open in the fall. Everybody was vaccinated, going maskless and reducing the need for social distancing. So we're going to be pretty much almost normal.
Well, that is a reason to be happy. Regretfully, healthcare facilities aren't out from under any mandates and are probably not ready, especially a children's hospital where over half of our kids can't be vaccinated anyhow. So we're going to continue to mask, at least when we're, to use the Disney term, when we're on stage as opposed to backstage. So in our private offices, we're able to be maskless as I am here today. Anybody else? All right. Well, hearing none, let's do a little icebreaker. And this is one I'm ad-libbing. I changed it up because I was just at the risk committee and we had a lot of really bright, thoughtful people there. And one of them, who I won't name, mentioned the phrase when we looked at a certain policy, a lot of people will be dropping dimes. I had no idea what that was. And it turns out that many of us, well, several of us, professed that we didn't know what that meant. So what I would like to do for this icebreaker is have you take a stab at defining what that term means. We did a little research in that meeting to define that a little bit better, but we got disparate ideas from different sources such as Wikipedia and whatnot. And in lieu of taking a stab at that, can you share another phrase that you hear used that is either misused or misses by a bit? And I'll give you an example. When I came here, I had several colleagues at the hospital that would talk about, formulating an idea, and they just had the bare bones of that idea, and they were going to flush out the idea as opposed to flesh out the idea. So, I was new to the area, and I repressed any giggle because I thought that I had a very different image of flushing out something rather than flushing out something. So let's see. Katie Miller, do you want to drop dimes or do you want to share another phrase?
I knew you were going to call on me, and this is the one time I'm like, don't call on me. Just don't call on me today, because we've had a lot of moving parts in our house this weekend, and my brain is fried. So I can't even. And I've lived a lifelong resident of Akron, so any colloquialisms that are said around here, I already know them. And dropping dimes, I think it's about snitching. Back in the days, made a payphone. You would drop a dime in a payphone if you were going to rat somebody.
Well, all right. We know.
I think, I don't know.
Well, that may well work. We'll get a disclosure here at the end. All right, Mella, I haven't talked to you in a while. Dropping dimes or something else?
How about, I often hear people say they're going to nip it in the butt, but I think it's nip it in the bud. So I think that's it. And I would agree with Katie on dropping dimes, tattletaling and gossiping and putting your dime in the phone to make a quick phone call.
So anybody who's used a dime for a telephone call, raise your
dating
hand.
ourselves. We're dating ourselves.
Yeah, looking at different screenshots, I'm getting less than 50% of people that do that. All right. Steve, I have to let you down. Our foursome for the Kent Rotary didn't have the two leaders bailed on you and your colleague because I think they thought you were ringers and were a little intimidated. But having said that, do you want to drop dimes, or do you want to comment on another phrase or truism that you find entertaining or hard to define?
I assume you're talking about Steve Bozart, which is fine.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Steve. I'm looking at you.
That's okay.
You can't see me.
Right. Yeah, I'll go along. The definition of drop dimes definitely is dropping the dime in the payphone. I don't even think it's a matter of dropping dimes. It's a matter of if you used a payphone, you're dating yourself. But one of my pet peeves and lines that I don't like is the word moot. You know, the point is moot, which actually, if you look at the definition, means open for discussion. So it's kind of exactly the opposite of what people really think moot means. You think about a moot court, open for discussion. Now, I do think some of the dictionaries have added the new definition, which basically means it's irrelevant or academic, but it's a grossly misused word. So there you go. We've learned something today, Dr. Rob.
Well, that's great, Steve. I always learn something. And I hear that term used, overused.
Oh, they also will say it's mute, which is a whole different thing.
Which means you haven't turned your speaker on. This we all know mute well this year.
Yeah, we all know what mute means now.
All right, Christina Horak. Do you have a phrase that you'd like to share or define?
Or I will agree with the consensus on dropping dimes. And then it's actually a lot of fun with my kids and then working with some international people on idioms and things like that. And one that actually came up a couple weeks ago was out of the blue. Somebody said out of the sky. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I have no idea what they're talking about. But something happened in the middle of nowhere. It came out of the blue and it was totally misused. So that was pretty funny here.
That's cute. I don't know how you translate some of those things. I had an experience when I was in undergrad where I was at an international group of people at a lab up at Roswell Park Institute of Cancer Lab. And there was a Frenchman there who really spoke very little English. And I spoke equally little French, but I was the only one that could communicate with them within the dorm that we lived in. And he kept asking me, qu'est-ce que c'est stuff? I said, what? He said, qu'est-ce que c'est stuff? So he wanted to know, he found that the Americans that were in this group would always finish the sentence with, well, we'll go do that and some other stuff. And so he wanted the definition of stuff, and it created a little levity there. All right, let's see who's going to bring us home here. Doug Cole, I saw you raise your hand. You may not have been raising it for me, but I'm gonna ask you to share.
I was the one I thought of when you said it. Well, dropping dimes in basketball is an assist, but I could care less. The proper phrase is I couldn't care less. Not I could care less. Well, okay, I'm glad you could care less. So that's one of my pet phrases.
Well, that's great. I think that the one that's kind of gotten away because of the pandemic is when people would say, virtually, they would refer to something that really wasn't virtual. But now that everything's virtual, they can't go wrong. All right. Well, thanks again for indulging in our trivia and discussions. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Justice Pat Dewine, who was elected to the Ohio Supreme Court January in 2017. He received his law degree from University of Michigan Law School with honors, actually top 10%. So it's a little more than honors. And Justice Dewine, in addition to his service on the Supreme Court, is committed to further the rule of law through education. And I know he's been on the circuit to speak to several Rotary clubs. And I got word from one of our colleagues up north that it was really an enlightening opportunity. So when his office made him available, we jumped on that. And without further ado, Justice Dewine, welcome. I think you're muted, Justice.
That's embarrassing because we, you know, we want
moot or mute.
attorneys who argue in front of us to unmute, and
you were just playing with us because you didn't want it to be moot.
Right. And I give CLEs to attorneys about remote oral arguments. And I always tell them, put something on your screen, put a post-it because you'll forget. I do the same thing. So let me let's see. Let me share my screen here. Of course, when we tested it out, it worked fine, but now that screen is gone. So let me just reopen that back up, and I'll share it in a second here. All right, let's try this again. Here we go. So I'm going to tell you, and do I need to admit people to the waiting room, or is someone else doing that?
Oh, we're doing that.
Okay, I just see it popping up. I didn't know.
Yeah, because you're a co-host. Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, let me. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what we do on the Ohio Supreme Court. I'm going to take you through a case today, kind of from beginning and end, just to use that to illustrate kind of the inside workings of the court. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. So. First question I get sometimes is, how do you get to be on the Supreme Court? Well, we're not like federal judges. We're not appointed. We don't serve for life. We're elected. We're elected to 6-year terms. If you don't like us, you can throw us out of office. The reason for that goes back actually to our Constitution of 1851, which is the actual Constitution Ohio has today. And believe it or not, at the time that we were enacting a new constitution, one of the big issues was selection of judges. Under the old constitution, the legislature had appointed judges. Some people thought that judges were beholden to the legislature, so they wanted to change that. Some people said, let's go to a federal model, have the executive branch, the governor, appoint judges, but others said we have the same problem. So the view that ultimately carried the day was that we ought to have judges that are truly independent. The way to do that was to have judges who weren't answerable to any other branch of government, only to the people, so directly elected by the people. So that's the system we have. If you don't like us, you can throw us out of office. And I think in theory, it's a pretty good system. One of the problems, though, is people don't always know a lot about their judges. So I think it's important that we do things like this and get out and talk to people about what we do and why it matters. So why should you care about the Ohio Supreme Court? Why does it matter to you? Well, for one thing, even though we hear a lot about the U.S. Supreme Court and federal courts, 90% of cases are going to be heard in state courts. So the cases that really affect your lives, things like an adoption, a divorce, child custody, being a victim of crime, a contract dispute. Those things are all by and large going to happen in state courts. And in Ohio, the Ohio Supreme Court is going to set the precedent. They write the rules that apply in all the other courts in Ohio. I think the most important thing we do is we're the protector of your individual rights and freedoms. We're all guaranteed certain things by the Ohio Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, right to free speech, freedom of religion, et cetera. But those things really can't enforce themselves, right? I mean, unless you have a court that's willing to step in when another branch of government infringes on those rights, then those rights just become a piece of paper. You look at the Constitution of the former Soviet Union, guaranteed all kinds of human rights, but it didn't matter because you didn't have a legal system that protected those rights. So I think probably our most awesome responsibility is the duty to declare a law passed by the General Assembly unconstitutional if it infringes upon your constitutional rights. Jobs in the economy. We don't think about courts as mattering to the economy, but having clear legal rules allows people to invest and do business in the state of Ohio. And we've seen that places that don't have good legal systems, where people don't know what the rules are places where people don't want to invest. Public safety. Obviously, our criminal law is going to be enforced in our court system. So if you care about the safety of your neighborhood, your court's going to matter. And finally, even when we don't see the court, it's there in the background. And it allows us to function as a society. Think about something as simple as buying a house. What happens? Well, someone writes a contract, another person accepts the contract, a closing date is set, bank loans money. Well, none of those things happen without a court system sitting in the background. The reason that contract is more than a piece of paper is because either side can go into court and enforce it if the other side doesn't do what they're supposed to do. The reason the bank loans you money is because they can go to court and foreclose if you don't pay it back. So even when we don't see the court system, it's there in the background. Sometimes our courts work the best when you don't see them. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to take you through a case from beginning to end through the Supreme Court. This is a case we decided last year. It may not be the most significant case we decided, but it's a pretty representative case. And so I'm going to tell you the story about two flower shops. They were located in Worcester, Ohio. They still are, as far as I know. One's named Worcester Floral. The other was named Green Thumb Floral and Garden Center. Well, they were competitors. The owner of Worcester Floral decided to go out of business. She'd had it with selling flowers. So she set about closing down, doing all the things you do when you unwind a business. One thing she did or didn't do was she had a domain name, worcesterfloral.com. She didn't renew that domain name. She didn't pay the money to the domain name register, so it lapsed. But while she was in the process of closing down, one of her employees stepped up and said, I would really love to own a flower shop. Can I step in and buy this? The owner of Worcester Floral said, sure. They worked out a deal. They sold the employee the assets for $1, and the employee took over the flower store. Well, after this transition, if you were looking for flowers in Worcester, Ohio, and say you went to the website and typed in worcesterfloral.com, here's what you'd see. The owner of Green Thumb had snatched up that domain name when it became publicly available, and she used it to redirect people to the Green Thumb website. Well, that didn't go over very well with the new owner of Worcester Floral. She thought that was completely wrong. So I think she sent her husband actually to talk to the owner of Green Thumbs. Conversation did not go very well. The owner of Green Thumb said, I bought this fair and square. The owner, but if you want, I'll sell it to you. I'll sell it to you for $2,500. The owner of Worcester Floral didn't like that one bit. So what did she do? Well, she filed a lawsuit. Worcester is in Wayne County, as you probably know. So she filed it in the Wayne County Court of Common Pleas. She alleged that Green Thumb had committed a deceptive trade practice. And that comes from an Ohio law that says it's illegal to use a trade practice that, quote, causes a likelihood of confusion or misunderstanding as to the source, sponsorship, approval, or certification of goods or services. So she asked for an injunction saying, Judge, force my competitor to stop using worcesterfloral.com. Well, the judge held a trial. No one asked for a jury, so it was just a bench trial, just a judge. The judge heard witnesses, heard evidence, and ultimately came to the conclusion that there was no violation of the law. This practice was not illegal. Well, the owner of Worcester Floral didn't like that. So what did she do? Well, in Ohio, you have an automatic right to appeal at the first level. So if you lose in the trial court, all you have to do is pay your filing fee, file something called a notice of appeal, and you get to go to the Court of Appeals. We have 12 different districts in the Court of Appeals in Ohio. Depending on where you live is what court you go to. So in Worcester went to the 9th district, which is actually the same one that you would go to if you had an appeal in Akron. In the Court of Appeals, it's a little different than the trial court. There's no evidence, no witnesses. You're not re-arguing the case. You don't start from scratch. Instead, the attorneys argue about what happened below and whether the trial court made a mistake. The Court of Appeals, you get 3 judges. The idea is that you have more impassioned reflection with 3. And it's just, as I mentioned, it's just attorneys arguing. So the judges heard the case. Ultimately, they issued a decision, and the judges on the Court of Appeals voted 2-1 to uphold the trial court. So what's next? Well, that's where we come in. Worcester Floral, still unhappy. They can ask the Ohio Supreme Court to hear their case. So this is different than the trial court or the Court of Appeals, where there's an automatic right to appeal. To get to the Supreme Court, you have to convince us why your case is really important. So you have to explain why it is of great public or general interest. So we're looking for cases, maybe where there's uncertainty in the law in Ohio. I mentioned there's 12 appellate districts. Maybe they disagree. So someone who lives in Cincinnati might get a different result than someone who lives in Akron, even though the facts are the same, because the courts disagree about the law. So we're looking for cases like that where we can straighten that disagreement out, make sure everyone's treated the same across the state, or other cases that we think are pretty important. Your odds of getting in are pretty small. In 2019, there were 1,100 people who asked to hear their case. We accepted 43. So if you want us to hear your case, you have to write something called a jurisdictional memorandum explaining why your case is so important. We ought to take it, and the other side can write a response saying why it's really not that important. I get about 50 of these every 2 weeks and vote on them. So I just record my votes electronically. So every other Friday we submit our votes. My colleagues do the same. If something gets 4 votes, it comes in. So Worcester Floral, we voted to accept it. I don't think I did, but 4 of my colleagues did, so it came in. So what happens next? Well, the first thing is the parties have to file briefs. So the losing party writes a brief saying why they think the Court of Appeals got it wrong. The party that won the Court of Appeals gets to respond, and then the losing party gets the last word. I read all those briefs. People think of me as a judge. You probably have an image of me sitting behind a bench with a robe on. Well, that happens sometimes, but that's generally only about 4 days a month. Most of the time, I'm actually sitting at my desk reading and writing, sitting actually right at this desk right here. Unless I'm in Cincinnati, I'm sitting there. But generally, I'm sitting somewhere reading and writing. When the briefs come in, I read them. I also have 3 law clerks. So generally people fairly new out of law school, who are generally do pretty well in law school. And each one, they work for him for about a year. And each one is assigned a case. And so they'll write me a memorandum about what they think about it. I read the briefs myself first because I like to not be colored by what they think. But I'll read their memo, and then sometimes I'll go back to them, ask them to do some research, ask them to dig out parts of the record if I want to look at it, whatever it takes really for me to kind of make up my mind about the case. So after a briefing, it's set for oral argument.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
Oral argument looks kind of like this, actually exactly like this.
You may be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our first case is 2018-1814, State of Ohio versus Gerald Prendergast. For Mr. Prendergast is Victoria Bader.
Good morning. May it please the court.
So
My name is Victoria Bader.
So we'll hear oral arguments generally every 2 or 3 weeks. We'll generally hear 2 days on a week when we hear oral argument, and we'll probably hear about 5 cases a day. So each side gets 15 minutes to argue. Typically what will happen is the attorney will start arguing. They'll get about a minute or 2 in, and we'll start peppering with questions. So it's really not giving a speech. It's more kind of a I tell people treat it like a conversation with the court. You think about 15 minutes isn't very long. A case, jury trial might go 3-4 weeks, but by the time you get to us, you generally can only argue for 15 minutes. So you have to be kind of pretty succinct. That's why probably the briefs are more important than the argument side. So that's what oral argument has looked like. Unfortunately, for the last year, it's looked more like this.
Our second case is 2019-322 Worcester Floral and Gift LLC versus Green Thumb Floral and Garden Center. For the appellant, Ms. Audie.
Good morning, Your Honors, and may it please the court.
So like you, we've moved to Zoom. It's worked out fine. I miss doing it in person. I don't think we've lost a lot by doing it in Zoom. For us, it's actually pretty easy because it's just attorneys arguing. It's much more difficult, I think, for our trial courts that have had to balance, juries and trying to keep jurors separated and witnesses and exhibits. But I'll be very happy when we're done with Zoom and go back to doing it live. So what happens after oral argument? Well, after oral argument, we huddle. We have to decide how the case is going to be decided and who's going to write the decision. So we'll go back to our conference room. You see over here on the left, our conference room is the top floor of this building. And the way it works is the chief will call a case. She'll say what she thinks and how it should be decided, and we'll go around the table in order of seniority. So the most senior speaks first, and then down to the most junior. We have an ironclad rule. The first time through, no one can interrupt anyone else. And that seems easy, but it's actually, if you're sitting there, it's kind of hard not to jump in sometimes. I think it's a good rule to make sure everyone's heard. I grew up with 8 brothers and sisters. It probably would have been a good thing to do at our dinner table. So we'll discuss the case. And then once we get around the first time, there's kind of a free-for-all. We'll discuss it as much as anyone wants to discuss it. So after that, it's time to decide who's going to write the opinion. You may know that after we discuss the case, then we vote. So there'll be a vote to affirm or to reverse the court below. So in this case, in the Worcester Floral case, the majority was to affirm the court below. So whoever's in the majority, then one of them has to write the opinion. So you may know on the U.S. Supreme Court, the Chief Justice John Roberts assigns the majority opinion if he's in the majority to another justice, or keeps it for himself. In our court, we're a lot more sophisticated than that. We play a dice game. So you'll see here there's 7 die, 1 for each member. Actually, they're called pills, 1 for each member of the court. They go on, whoever's the majority, their pill goes in this leather bottle. And this bottle, by the way, is this old beat up bottle that I think came out of a pool hall somewhere. Actually, I think a pool hall in Cleveland. I'm told it's been around the court forever. So whoever's in the majority, their pills go in the bottle. I'm number 2 right now. So my pill went in the bottle in the Worcester Floral case because I agreed the court should be upheld below. And when the bottle was rolled, my number came out. So I was assigned to write the opinion. So why do we write written opinions? One reason is I mentioned that we set the precedent for all the other courts in Ohio. So it's important that they understand not just what we decided, but how we got to where we got and why. So they can apply our decision to a different set of facts. So written opinions help accomplish that. The other reason I think goes back historically to the legitimacy of the court. When Alexander Hamilton was trying to convince people in the new United States to adopt the Constitution, what he said was the judiciary was the least dangerous branch of government. By that, he said that the Army has the power of the sword. Excuse me, the executive branch has the power of the sword. So the president can call the Army to get what he or she wants. The legislative branch, Congress, has the power of the purse. So the Congress can accomplish what it wants by spending money or by taxing people. All the judiciary has is its will. We have to depend on other people to enforce our judgments. So our only authority comes from the confidence that other branches of government and the people, by and large, place in us. So written opinions are one way we justify that confidence by showing people exactly why we decide what we did, and it was based on the rule of law. I always, when I write an opinion, I try to think of the losing party. I want to write something that's in plain English, so not just attorneys can read, but someone can pick up off the street and read. It's not written in legalese. And I want the losing party to be able to look at that opinion and say, you know, I may not agree with the result, but this was the result of a reasoned process. It wasn't based on the whims of the judges or justices. So that's what I kind of aspire to when I write an opinion. So what happens is, after we leave that conference, and I'm assigned the opinion, I'll go back to my chambers. I'll work on that opinion with my law clerks. It might take 3 or 4 weeks. Kind of depends on how hard the case is to come up with that opinion. Then once it's written, I will circulate it to all the other justices. And at that point, someone else can weigh in. Someone can write a dissent saying they disagree and here's why. Or someone can write a concurrence saying, well, I agree with the result, but not really with all your logic. So once those are written, we come back to that conference room table and we vote again. And sometimes a dissent will actually get more votes than the majority got on that second vote. So then we'll have to change everything. The dissent will have to make theirs into a majority opinion and vice versa. In this case, it came back and Justice French wrote a dissent. She disagreed with me. We came back, we voted again. I think there were 5 votes for my majority opinion. So it was the majority opinion. And there were 2 people who joined Justice French's dissent. So why do we have dissents? Why don't all judges see things the same way? Several reasons. One is, I think for us at least, you know, we only take a small percentage of the cases we're asked to take. So like the U.S. Supreme Court, we're only taking the hard cases. We're taking cases where there really is a lot of room for difference of opinion. So that's one thing. But I think the other thing is that judges do have somewhat different judicial philosophies. I see my role as a judge to apply the law as it's written. I say I'm a textualist. I look at the plain text of the statute or contract or constitution or whatever in front of me, and I try to apply the plain meaning of that. Other judges may take a more expansive view of the judicial role. They may say, okay, well, what was really intended? What's the best result here? What was the purpose of the statute? And so those folks, you know, may come to slightly different results than someone who's more focused on text like I am. But I think that for me, my philosophy makes sense because I think if you go beyond what the text says, really you're stepping outside the judicial role. You're becoming a legislature. You're not limiting yourself to just applying the law that's in front of you. You're actually making the law. So last question I get sometime is, can Worcester, Floral, and Gifts appeal? And if you were in person, I'd make you show your hands. And my guess is about half of you would say yes, about half would say no. The answer here is they cannot appeal. The law that we dealt with was a state law. It was passed by the Ohio legislature. So when it comes to Ohio law, we have the last word. We cannot be overruled by the United States Supreme Court or anyone else. If there had been a federal law involved, say this was a criminal case and it's a burglary, say, which is Ohio law, but the defendant argued that the police illegally searched his house and that's how they came to find the evidence that was used against him. Well, that illegal search would generally be an argument that there was a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And so because you're talking about the United States Constitution, that's a federal law, so you could ask the United States Supreme Court to hear that case. They wouldn't have to. It's like ours. The review is discretionary. They pick their cases too, but you could file a petition for a writ of certiorari, as they call it, and ask the U.S. Supreme Court to hear the case. So let me just stop there. Here's some contact info. I'm always interested in feedback, or you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people have.
All right, we have a few questions for you here, Your Honor.
Excellent.
First and foremost, folks want to know, to the extent that the public at large wants to be educated as to a judicial election, is there a site or a single source of information they could turn to get a sort of fair and balanced look at it?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a website, which I think the court actually does in conjunction with the University of Akron. I think they're involved in it, but it's called Judicial Votes Count, I think it's Judicial Votes Count. So if you Google that, you'll come to it. And you could type in there, you can type in like your county, and I think maybe even like your zip code or where you vote. Anyway, it will show you all the judges that you will personally have to vote on. So that's certainly one way. It's kind of like biographical information. It's kind of, I think the judges generally put their own information out there, so it's kind of what they have put up. But I think that's a good place to start anyway.
A couple more questions here. What's specifically your favorite kind of case to hear?
I guess, well, let me say, I don't know that I have one favorite. I think what I love the most about my job is that every case is different. And the great thing about being a judge is you get cases from all areas of the law. When I was in private practice, like I think most lawyers, or at least lawyers at larger law firms, you're kind of in a fairly narrow area of the law. The great thing about being a judge is you see everything. So I love that part of it. I think, I really enjoy getting cases that involve the Ohio Constitution, because when we get a case that involves the U.S. Constitution, what we're really doing is we're saying, okay, what has the U.S. Supreme Court said about this issue? And we're bound to follow their precedent. So we're looking to what they would think or how they would decide it. When it comes to the Ohio Constitution, which also guarantees people's certain rights, and people don't know as much about, but there's guarantees in the Ohio Constitution that are different from the U.S. Constitution. But when it comes to the Ohio Constitution, we're the last words. You're really writing on a blank slate. So you may have Ohio precedent, from the Ohio Supreme Court in the past, but we can, if we want to and feel it's really necessary, we can reverse that precedent. So I like those cases because I think they're, there's just more, there's just more flexibility, and you really can do exactly what you think's right rather than be bound by, maybe an interpretation by the U.S. Supreme Court that you think was wrong.
One of the questions we got was, what is your feeling on the lifetime judicial term versus a term limit? Do you have a preference there?
I've actually kind of come around on this, when it comes to federal judges. I used to think, I've read a lot of Federalist Papers, et cetera. And I used to think that having lifetime appointments was a good thing for federal judges for the reasons that Hamilton talked about. I've come to think that you could probably accomplish the same thing by having a term, not a short term, but if the president appointed people for 25 or 30 years, I think that would make sense. I think it would get rid of kind of the impetus that sometimes justices have to stay past when maybe they should because they want to wait for a different president to appoint. I think it would also cut down on some of the battles and the confirmation proceedings and make them a little less heated because you knew there was going to be a certain amount of transition. And I think it would also help because right now presidents have an incentive to say, I want to appoint someone as young as I possibly can so they can be on the court as long as they can. If you knew there was a term of years, older people like me would have a chance of being appointed. Now, I'm joking about that, but if you had a term of years, I think you would get rid of some of that pressure to appoint, really young people and, get more people into their 50s.
Interesting. So one of the questions we have as well is, what's your biggest judicial influence? Did you have a Chief Justice trading card growing up that was important? Sounds like Alexander Hamilton was important.
For me, probably by far the biggest influence was when I got out of law school, I had a chance to clerk for a judge on the Sixth Circuit. It's David Nelson. He was actually appointed by Ronald Reagan back in the I guess he was appointed in the 80s, but I clerked for him right after law school. I just thought he was a phenomenal judge, and so clearly for me, that's been the biggest influence. People. I look at people on the Supreme Court. I've always admired Antonin Scalia. I think that some of the things that he did on the court, were really had a big impact, and particularly kind of his kind of textualism, getting people to focus on the actual language of what's in front of the court. So he would probably be another.
Excellent. All right, we have a few more here, Your Honor, if you've got a little bit more time.
Absolutely. I'm happy to. As long as...
Let me look through here. Somebody wants to know whether you ever have concerns when you have decisions that, while purely legal, are correct, don't feel equitable to you in a sense.
Sometimes, our job is to apply the law, and there's lots of laws that we apply that I wouldn't have voted for if I was in the state legislature. But I didn't run for the state legislature. That's not my job to make law. So, generally as a judge, you get pretty good at just applying the law. Certainly there's times where, you're really worried about the result or don't like the result. Sometimes you might write a concurring opinion saying, I'm making this decision because there's no other choice based on what the law is, but the General Assembly really ought to take another look at this. So, sometimes you can do that, but as judges, our oath is to follow the law, follow the Constitution. So even when we don't like the results, we have to be willing to apply the law.
Okay, so just in the interest of your time, Your Honor, and everyone else's, I think Rob is going to wrap up and potentially save a little bit more time if we have it.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Justice Dewine. That was really all that it was built about for my colleagues. So it was very, very interesting for a guy in medicine who knows very little about what your business does. But thank you so much. Just to wrap up, and then we will stay on. I want to let people know that next week's speaker is Anne Graffis with some updates on the Hall of Fame Village project. Want to wish happy birthday to two Rotarians that have a birthday this week, Marilyn Bucky on 5/29 and Elizabeth Campbell on 5/31. Our joint date anniversaries, we've got Luke O'Neill, 1 year, Nicole Major, 6 years, Blake Babcock, 7 years, Julie Brandel, 7 years, and Deborah Cook, 26 years, a Rotarian. So again, thank you all for joining us today. I will adjourn the meeting, and then we will reconvene with the justice and have some opportunities for us to catch up with some friends. The meeting is adjourned. All right, thanks. So Chaz, we had several other questions. Or where are you in that chat?
We have a few more. Your Honor, do you have a bit more time?
Sure.
So we had a couple different more interesting ones here. I guess we had a question about oral arguments. Is there any advice you could give to folks doing oral arguments? Is there a skill or a technique you prefer versus?
Yeah. What I tell my students about oral argument, different groups I talk to, is you really need to treat it like it's a conversation. People who do well in oral argument walk in well prepared. They understand the facts, they understand the case law, and they're able to, and they have 3 or 4 points they want to make, and they're able to kind of have a conversation with the judges and transition between those points. So sometimes you're going to, in our court at least, you're going to be asked a lot of questions. So you don't really know, you may be asked your 4th point first, right? Sort of about it. So I know some litigants who take note cards and they shuffle those as they practice so they can transition from any point to any other point. So whatever question they get, they can answer the question and then go back to it. People who don't do well in oral argument are people who come in with a speech that you may have memorized or written out, and that they are intent on giving that speech. And whatever questions you ask them, they just come right back to their prepared remarks. And that just does not work very well for oral arguments. I mean, we've generally read the briefs, so it's not really a time to re-argue the whole case. It's really more of a time to try to make your main points, and for us to get the questions we want answered.
Okay, perfect. Rob, you had a question as well about the Court of Appeals, right?
Right. I just was wondering, when the three judges hear that, do they then just sit at their table as you showed and think through it and make their own decision, or do they go to chambers and have a discussion?
Yeah. Each court has probably different procedures. So I'll tell you what we did when I was in the Court of Appeals, which is probably pretty similar. We would actually get there about 15 minutes before oral argument. We discuss the case a little bit, each case, and then we would convene after oral argument and discuss the case and take a preliminary vote on the case, each case, and then assign someone to write it. Actually, with the Court of Appeals I was on, you knew in advance which cases you would be writing if you were in the majority. But so I mean, I think almost universally, the judges are going to get together and discuss how they want to decide it before someone's assigned to write the opinion.
The question is, how do you stay impartial? Everybody
Right.
has opinions on things. How do you do that? And what's the process there?
I mean, I think you just have to focus on, what the law says. I mean, I think if you, I mean, I think we all, we all have certain kinds of, life experiences that may color how we think. But, our job is to be as impartial as we possibly can. And I think you do that by saying, what is the plain language of the statute? That's, for me, that kind of gets to why I have the judicial philosophy I have. I think if you have, if your judicial philosophy is more, is more open to things like, okay, what was the real purpose here? What was the intention? I think you risk putting your own personal viewpoints in it a lot more than if you say, okay, what does the plain language of this statute mean?
All right, next one's a little less heavy. We were wondering, what was your area of focus before becoming a judge, and was the judiciary a goal for you?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So for me, it was kind of funny. Not funny, but I clerked for a judge, and I guess I love doing that. And I guess I had in the back of my mind somewhere that if I had a chance to be a judge, I'd love to. But I kind of went a very different path. I went to work for a fairly big law firm in Cincinnati, about 100-person law firm. And I was doing litigation, and then I got involved in local politics. I ran for Cincinnati City Council, served on city council there, while I was practicing law. But it was a pretty, it's not a full-time job on city council in Cincinnati, but it's a lot. You're not practicing law full-time if you're doing that. So I did that, and then I ran for county commissioner, and I served as county commissioner for 4 years, and in Hamilton County, where Cincinnati is. And so I was. Same time, I maintained some law practice at the firm, stayed at the same firm, and my practice was actually. I started out, I was doing like appellate work, a lot of appellate work, different commercial litigation, but I actually kind of migrated to where I was doing all mass tort bankruptcies, so be representing companies who had big asbestos liabilities and these huge bankruptcy cases. And most of what I did was actually in New York City by like the last 5 or 6 years I was practicing. But at some point I was practicing a lot, and the politics was a lot. And I finally figured out that I like the law part of it better than I liked the politics part of it. And I had a chance to run for common pleas court judge. So I did that, and it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. So very happy about that kind of change.
Well, I think the last one we got here is what do you do for fun? What are the hobbies other than reading legal opinions?
Yeah, so I like baseball. I'm a big Reds fan. I like sports. I like to read. The last few years, I've been getting more and more into gardening, so I've been doing planting a lot. So that's a lot of stuff. I always ran. I ran track and cross country in college, and I've continued to do some of that off and on. Although I'm kind of on an off period right now, and I'm kind of off and on about biking too. So those are kind of.
All right. Well, that's the questions we have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Again,
Thank
so
you
much for your time.
That was fun. Thank you so much.